Hello everybody, welcome to today's video lecture, and we're covering the cardiovascular system, and specifically in this chapter we're talking about blood. So let's go ahead and begin. Let's start with functions of blood. The first function listed here is transportation. So your blood will transport nutrients, oxygen, hormones, and waste products. So nutrients from GI tract to your organs, cells, tissues, cells, oxygen from your lungs to your tissues, to your cells, hormones from your glands, all through your body, and waste product from your cells to excretory organs, such as your respiratory system organs, right, to your lungs or to your kidneys, that are organs of your urinary system. Another function of blood is defense. You have white blood cells, and they protect you from pathogens such as bacteria, viruses. And another function of defense is clotting. So when you have a cut in your blood vessels, you want to form clot and stop bleeding. Also blood is important in homeostasis. It regulates your internal body temperature and also chemical balance. Blood composition. Now, if you draw blood, let me get my pen. So for example, you have a patient, you draw your patient bloods, and you put blood inside test tube, and then you put test tube in a centrifuge. So you spin it around, and blood will be separated into three major components. On top, you will have plasma. In the middle, you will have what we call buffy coat. Buffy coat include white blood cells and platelets. And then on the bottom of the test tube, you will have red blood cells. Now, these red blood cells have special name. We call it hematocrit. Right, so now normal hematocrit is about 45%. And you can see here, this is a symbol for female, and this is a symbol for male. So it might be a little bit lower in female and a little bit higher in male. Right, but normal hematocrit, if you want to remember one number, is 45%, around 45%. Now, if you have depressed hematocrit, so less than normal, this condition is called anemia. And if you have elevated hematocrit, it is called polycythemia. So that's what it says over here. Right, so hematocrit measure percentage of red blood cells, the packed cell volume. Buffy coat include white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Mostly water, but it also will have proteins, nutrients, and hormones. So now, major characteristic of blood is a viscous fluid. The temperature is a little bit higher than your core body temperature, because your normal body temperature is about 37 degrees of Celsius. Now your blood is 38 degrees of Celsius. pH is 7.35, 7.45, and you have about 5 liters of blood. And again, it says here a little bit more in males and less in females, but you know, it really depends on how big of a person you are, right? Some females may have you know, more blood than males, so I wouldn't really look at these numbers. I would just remember that about 5 liters of blood. We already mentioned that your blood is made of plasma and what we call formed elements. Now, formed elements include these two structures, buffy coat, right, and hematocrit. Those are formed elements. Now, plasma is 55% of your blood. So it says right here. So it's a little bit more than half. But plasma itself is 92% water, and it has plasma proteins and other solutes. And what are those other solutes? We can see in this table. So we have water, right? That is 92%, and major function, water is solvent for carrying other substances. It has ions, including sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, bicarbonate, and their function is osmotic balance, right? pH buffering, and nerve and muscle function. Your nerve really rely heavily on sodium and potassium and calcium, right? To generate this electrical impulse and allow nerve to transmit information and allow your muscles to contract. Now, plasma proteins, we have many different proteins. The most abundant is albumin, and those are for osmotic balance, pH buffering. We also have fibrinogen, protein important for clotting of blood, and antibodies. Now, another name for antibodies is immunoglobulins, and of course, they're important in immunity, right? And here we have substances transported by blood, nutrients, waste product, respiratory gases, including oxygen, carbon dioxide, and hormones. Now, formation of blood cells is called hematopoiesis. So here's the name hematopoiesis. Hemopoiesis is pretty much the same. Now, erythrocytes and erythrocytes are red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, they have a short life cycle. RBCs, they live 120 days, white blood cells lives even shorter life, and platelets just maybe 10-15 days, right? Just few weeks. That's why you constantly need to produce new blood cells, including erythrocytes, lymphocytes, and platelets, and leukocytes, I'm sorry, I would say, and including leukocytes and lymphocytes, right? So leukocytes is white blood cells, lymphocytes is a type of white blood cells. So where exactly this hematopoiesis happen? So on this diagram, you can see that in prenatal development, most of blood cells happen in a yolk sac, right? Kind of like at the first, several months, and well, I would say, yeah, the beginning, and then it drops drastically, right? Because this yolk sac get pretty much, so we don't have yolk sac after a few months of development. And then, liver pick up this job. So most of the blood cells are produced by liver in prenatal development, right? During embryonic development, some in spleen, and we see we have increased production in the bone marrow, right? And, some hematopoiesis happen in the lymph nodes. This is where the lymphocytes mature, right? That's why we call them lymphocytes. But when we are born, this is postnatal, we can see that we continue hematopoiesis in lymphocytes, but we don't have any more in liver, in spleen, and most of red blood cells are produced in bone marrow. Now, bone marrow is found obviously in your bones. And what is interesting here, if we're talking about long bones, like this femur or this tibia, right? So we have, pretty steep decline in a production of blood cells in long bonds. So you can see by age of, like 20, early 20 and late 20, we do not have much production of blood cells in long bonds, but we have in flat bonds like vertebra, pelvis, sternum, ribs, and overall production of blood cells decline with age. Okay. So it says over here, site of hematopoiesis, yolk sac in the first couple months, then fetal liver, spleen, lymphatic tissue, and red bone marrow. And then we continue production in red bone marrow and lymph nodes. We have maturation of lymphocytes, not production, but maturation. Now, actually, all your blood cells come from common cell over here, and it's a stem cell. And this stem cell found in bone marrow, right? So then these stem cells can differentiate into myeloid or lymphoid stem cells. So myeloid stem cell gonna differentiate into every cell of your blood with exception of lymphocytes. So here's lymphocytes, I will take it back, and natural killer cells. So only two cells are not ancestor of myeloid lineage, right? They come from lymphoid lineage, and those gonna be lymphocytes that further will differentiate into T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes and natural killer cell. Every other cell come from myeloid stem cell, including, look, our red blood cells, erythrocytes, and our white blood cells. So here, basophil, neutrophil, eosinophil, monocyte, and platelets. So platelets, so here's our platelets, red blood cells, and all these white blood cells. So this is what we call white blood cell, and only a natural killer cell that also white blood cell and small lymphocytes comes from lymphoid stem cells. So hematopoiesis regulates hematopoietic, regulated by hematopoietic growth factor, and we have lymphoid stem cell and myeloid stem cells. So here's our hematopoietic growth factors, including erythropoietin, and erythropoietin secreted by kidney. It's a glycoprotein, and it increases production of red blood cells. Thrombopoietin secreted by kidney as well, and liver, also glycoprotein, and it's important in development of platelets. Right, those are our growth factors. Now, structure of erythrocytes. Now, first of all, how many erythrocytes, or another name is red blood cells, do we have? In 1 microliter of blood, you have about 5 million red blood cells, so large amount. Red blood cells are small cells. Those are one of the smallest cells of a human body. Interesting that nucleus and organelles of red blood cells are lost. And this is lost because you need more space to carry oxygen, right? It's also lack of mitochondria, because you don't want to have mitochondria, otherwise you're going to use that oxygen within a cell, and lack of ER. So that's what it says. Most organelles are lost. Reticulocytes are red blood cells that are not mature yet. Erythrocytes are biconcave disc that increase surface area, again, to allow more volume and space to carry oxygen. And spectrin is a structural protein that make erythrocytes flexible. So you can see here kind of like brief introduction how red blood cells are formed, right? So we start with pro-erythroblast, and then we see some changes, right, in a couple days, and then ejection of nucleus. So the cells that will become our red blood cells, originally they have nucleus and they have organelles, but then they ejected and became mature red blood cells, right? So on day 5 through 7, we have reticulocytes, and then reticulocytes mature into erythrocytes. Now, the major function of erythrocytes is to carry oxygen. Now, within red blood cells, so you have red blood cell, and within this red blood cell, you will have molecules of hemoglobin. So this molecule of hemoglobin will be inside red blood cells. Now you have a lot of hemoglobin within one red blood cell. So each red cell include about 280 million molecules of hemoglobin. That's a lot, right? So you have about 5 million red blood cells in 1 microliter. And within every red blood cells, you have about 280 million molecules of hemoglobin. And this is like a diagram that tells you how hemoglobin look like. Now, hemoglobin is made of protein. So this brown, darker and lighter brown, those are proteins, right? And this is our globin form. And then you have this structure shown here, and this is heme group. So each hemoglobin has 4 heme groups. So if you look over here, this is how heme group look like. In the middle of each heme group, you will have iron. Then you have like nitrogen, and of course you have carbon and oxygen and hydrogen, right? But in the middle, you will have iron. So hemoglobin, large molecule, 4-folded proteins called globin. Each globin binds a heme, and each heme contains iron, and each iron can bind 1 oxygen. So that means that every molecule of hemoglobin can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. Now, when hemoglobin carries oxygen, we call it oxyhemoglobin. Hemoglobin picks up oxygen in lungs and became oxyhemoglobin. Deoxyhemoglobin, when hemoglobin releases oxygen, and it releases oxygen in your tissues, and carbaminohemoglobin, when hemoglobin binds to carbon dioxide. And yes, small amount of carbon dioxide binds to hemoglobin, and you carry this back to your lungs. But mostly, or most of carbon dioxide carried back in plasma. Now, life cycle of erythrocytes. Now, so let's start over here with number 1. So first, the formation of erythrocytes or hemopoiesis or whatever, hemopoiesis over here. Location of hemopoiesis is most your bone marrow, right? So here's in the bone marrow, we have stem cells, and then they will differentiate in myeloid stem cell, then several processes, and we get erythroblast, and then reticulocyte. Now, reticulocytes are released into bloodstream, where they mature into erythrocytes, and erythrocytes circulate for average of 120 days or 4 months. Now, after these 4 months, red blood cells became old and damaged, and they are phagocytized by macrophages in the bone marrow, liver, and spleen, right? So you form erythrocytes, right, in your bone marrow. So they circulate in your blood, carrying on their job. And then when they became old and damaged, your spleen, liver, and bone marrow, this is where you have macrophages. So this is macrophage, and it's gonna engulf and digest those old erythrocytes. So you see lysosomes gonna fuse, and then we break it down. Now what's gonna happen with this products of digestion within macrophage? Now, everything that we can, we will recycle. Now, remember that most of the volume of red blood cells occupied by hemoglobin. So you have lots of hemoglobin. So hemoglobin will be split into globin, and globin is protein, right? And heme. So you can see over here, we have this heme group. And then we have, you know, our globin, and globin is protein. Protein is made of amino acid. This macrophage is gonna break those proteins into amino acid using proteases, you know, those digestive enzymes, and we will reuse amino acids, right? So that's gonna be recycled. Now, what's gonna happen with this heme? Now heme, so iron will be removed from heme group, and let's see what happened with iron. So iron cannot enter your blood. It's pretty toxic. That's why iron will be bound to a special protein called transferrin. And this protein can easily carry this iron back to your bone marrow, and you know, you start this hematopoiesis all over, right? Or if you have extra amount, then a transferrin gonna transfer iron to liver, and your liver gonna store it in a form of ferrin, and when it's needed, it will be attached to transferrin again and to the bone marrow for hematopoiesis, right? Now, also, I forgot to tell you over here that globin and plus, you know, other component of a cell, like organelles, membrane, this all gonna be recycled to amino acids and cell components, and can enter our hematopoiesis again. Now, iron, I already told you, will be stored by liver or can enter hematopoiesis, but we will need transferrin to transport iron to the liver or to bone marrow. Now, the heme group is broken down to the chemical called biliverdin first, and then this biliverdin enters your liver and became bilirubin. And bilirubin gonna be the major part of bile. So your liver will produce bile, and the, you know, big part of your bile is bilirubin, and bile will help you to digest fat. Okay, well, I think that's like brief review of life cycle of erythrocytes. So you produce about 2 million cells per second. You need iron, copper, zinc, vitamin B. Erythrocytes live for 120 days, removed by macrophages, and hemoglobin is processed and recycled. Disorders of erythrocytes. So size, shape, number, all matters. So anemia is one of the disorders. We have about 400 different types of anemia. Anemia is reduced ability of your blood to supply oxygen to your tissues. So it can be because of deficiency of red blood cell or deficiency of hemoglobin, or because we have 400 different types, it can be, the problem can even be with your respiratory system, but it will cause anemia, because anemia is reduced ability to deliver oxygen to your tissue. It can be caused by blood loss, a faulty RBC production, excessive RBC destruction, and so on. Now here, for example, sickle cell anemia is a genetic disorder. It's abnormal hemoglobin type. And because of abnormal hemoglobin, you have abnormal shape of RBCs. And as a result, those RBCs deliver less oxygen. So over here, you can see red blood cells affected by sickle cell anemia. So it's not as this concave shape anymore. It's look like a moon, right? That's what sickle cell is. So that's a genetic disorder. So you also can have more common type of anemia is iron deficiency anemia. It can be vitamin deficiency anemia. You have low B12 or folate, right? So that's anemia. Polycythemia is elevated red blood cells count that increases viscosity of blood, and it makes difficult for heart to pump your blood, and it's actually can also cause elevated blood pressure. Polycythemia sometimes is seen in people who live on a higher elevation. So when you live on a high elevation, you have less oxygen in atmosphere, and your body compensated by synthesizing more red blood cells. Okay, and the next part of this chapter will be about white blood cells, but I think I'm gonna stop right here. I don't want this video to be too long, right? So in this video lecture, we covered function of blood, composition of blood, and structure and function of red blood cells. So thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful.